Hey, it's Jared with Gear and Light. Today we're going to take a look at the FX3 and I'm going to give you a tutorial of the camera. Now this is more for beginners who maybe have a little bit of experience with shooting video and you decided to jump up to the FX3 and maybe some of these controls you want to better understand how to use them. I'm going to walk around the camera. So this is, like I said, more for beginners or maybe somebody with a little bit of experience. So if you are more advanced, most of this is going to be review to you. But if you want to get used to the camera, it's also good to watch stuff like this. I find it useful when I'm trying something new or utilizing equipment that is new to me. So on this camera, I have the top handle that of course is for managing audio. We've got our top handle switch here. You can see I've got a small rig extender on here. I tend to mount a monitor on top of my FX3, and so having a little bit of extra grip to hold on to is fantastic. And so this small rig extender, as well as this NATO rail on top, allows me multiple mounting points on top of a rail that didn't really have any mounting points or any usefulness other than just being a handle. So it's nice to have that in place. Now I also have the Tilta FX3 cage on this camera. This is a partial cage that wraps around most of the camera except for the top, because I can choose whether to use the Sony handle or I can put the Tilta handle on top. Of course, the Tilta handle does not have audio support, so I will switch it out when I don't need audio support. You do have to use this top handle if you want XLR audio support. Otherwise, your only option is audio input on the side of the camera using an 1/8" audio jack, which is very limiting when you have the ability to connect something like this. So looking at the top handle before we get into the camera too much, we have two inputs here on the side that are XLR inputs. And so we just remove the little door and we can connect an XLR input to this, or even a 1/4" input. And then we have a third input right here behind a little door, which is an 1/8" input. So we have three inputs up here on the handle. And if we rotate this to the back, we have our input selection here, which we can choose to INT1, INT1 and 2, or INT3, and then that's channel 1 and channel 2. So I want INT1 going to both channel 1 and channel 2, and so if I had multiple microphones in there, I might go and make adjustments according to which microphone I had plugged in, or which microphones I wanted going to which channels. Moving over to the side of the camera with all of the controls, what I love is just the customization here in being able to control my audio. And so being that I usually only have one or two mics, I might have a shotgun mic plugged in, and then I might have an external little microphone that's wireless plugged in, like a wireless lapel, and I can attach both of those here. When that is configured, I have an XLR shotgun microphone going into the first input, and then I'll have the wireless microphone plugged into the 1/8", because a lot of the wireless microphones, the receiver has an 1/8" output. And so you can see right now it's configured, in input 1 is configured for a microphone, and in the green here, 48 volts plus means phantom power. Microphones, most of them are going to need phantom power, and so identify the shotgun microphone that you're using, and if it's an XLR shotgun microphone and it doesn't have its own internal battery, chances are it's probably going to need phantom power turned on. And then I have that set to 0 dB, and then I have it set to manual audio control, and then I can control that with this little wheel here. So input 2 is the next bank over, where we have the exact same controls, and we can also link between the two. So notice that the link option is enabled right now. That means that when I have an XLR plugged into input 1, it's also going to pull that audio over to input 2, so that way I get left and right audio channels. Now, I don't have to do this. I can have one audio channel going to the left, one audio channel going to the right, but if I don't have a microphone plugged in there, it doesn't make sense for me to just have a blank audio channel. I'm going to have to go in my video editor and move that audio channel down so that I have stereo audio. So when I'm only using one input, I will put it in link mode and then have that connected, so that way I'm getting both audio tracks, the input from audio track on both the left and right channels. And then if over here we have some settings for input 3. Input 3, being that it's 1/8 inch, does not have phantom power, so you are not going to have a switch for that. And so we've got those adjustments. And then I can also just flat out turn the handle audio on and off right here. If I wanted to turn audio off to the entire handle, I've got a switch for that. And you know, it's got a lock, so you have to push down in the middle of it, but it is a little bit wobbly of a switch, so I'm always aware of that switch. So that is pretty much everything that you've got with the top handle. Of course, you can mount your shotgun microphone in here by releasing this and flopping this over and fitting a shotgun mic. People have had issues finding shotgun mics that fit, and so what I have done with a shotgun mic is gotten O-rings, and I'll put O-rings on the shotgun mic, and then the O-rings will sit right in this little slot, and then when I clamp this down, so when I clamp this down, it clamps down on top of the O-rings, squishes the O-rings just a little bit, which then holds it nice and tight with the shotgun microphone. And I usually use 2 to 3 of those O-rings on the microphone, and it holds it nice and tight. It's a great way to mount your shotgun microphone in the default mount here, which of course is what it was designed for, and there's no other way to easily get a shotgun microphone put on here while still utilizing this handle. So let's move on down to the camera. Down to the side of the camera, you can see I've got an IRIX Cinema lens attached to it. This lens is fully manual, which means I adjust the iris or the aperture of the lens right here, and I adjust the focus of the lens right here. And this 45mm cinema lens is an affordable one, and it produces a fantastic image for the price point, and is just a well-built lens that I have enjoyed using so much that I've purchased the other IRIX lenses that they make for the Sony E-mount. Moving over to the port doors, we've got a nice big port door here for a full-size HDMI port, which is great. I love the fact that it's full-size HDMI. It's more stable, less wobbly, and an HDMI goes out into my Atomos recorder that I use for capturing the video. So this is the Atomos recorder that I use. You can see the HDMI cable, and then the power cable for the Atomos that I connect to my external battery. And so HDMI out right on the side of the camera. Next to that door is our 1/8 inch microphone input, which we would use if we were not using the top handle, and then also an output for monitoring our audio with headphones. So you would use this port here for monitoring your audio even with the top handle installed. You would plug in your headphones here for monitoring your audio. Down below that door, we have a USB Type-C, which supports charging while the device is running. So I usually have a USB-C plugged in, which is this cable right here, this cable that's attached to the back of these rails that my FX3 is typically attached to. I use this nice stretchy cable that is USB Type A on one side, USB Type C with the 90-degree on the other side, and then I plug that into external power, plug it into my FX3, and I have a fully charged, ready to go FX3 at all times. The power is always topped off. We've got the flippy screen here, which flips around and closes, so the flip screen is a nice addition. And then moving around to the other side of the camera on top, we have some buttons. And so we have our typical shutter button for taking pictures, and it works just like any other shutter button. So when you are in photo mode, you would use this button for taking pictures or for momentarily enabling autofocus. It also has a zoom wheel here. So if you're using clear image zoom or you're using a lens that has powered zoom that the camera can connect to, you can actually zoom in and out using this knob right here, which I think is great. I don't have any lenses that are power zoom lenses, but I like to use clear image zoom sometimes for just zooming in a little bit and getting closer when I need just that much more focal length and don't have the lens to provide it. So we have an iris button here, a white balance, and an ISO button, and those are great to have all of those buttons just right here. So I can easily go and control any of these settings just by pressing on the button, and it's going to take me to that setting on the back of the camera. We have a large recording button right here on top, which also enables red tally lights on the camera, which is great. I absolutely love that because the red tally lights mean recording, and it helps me know that regardless of of where I'm at, I can see that the camera is in fact recording. And then we have a D-pad up here on top of the camera, which helps us get through menus, or if you're using a selected point autofocus, you can move that autofocus point around the camera. So really nice button layout up here. Of course, many of these are customizable as well in the settings. You can come through and change these buttons to do something else if you find that the functionality that is default is not suited to your shooting style. Moving to the back of the camera. On the back of the camera, we have our power switch on and off right over here. We have our mode dial here, which is for switching between different shooting modes. On most cameras, that's a knob that you turn and rotate. So for example, on the A7 III, we've got a mode dial right here. On the FX3, we have a digital mode dial. And so we press mode, and then we can go through the different modes, whether you have camera photography shooting modes or video shooting modes to switch between. We have the menu button here, which we'll look at in a few minutes. We also have a dial here on the back, which by default, if you are in manual shooting mode, is going to allow you to adjust your shutter speed, or if you are in shutter priority mode. We then have a focus magnifier, which is one of the most useful buttons for me when it comes to shooting manually. So if I'm shooting with a manual focus lens like this lens does not have autofocus, having this option, and so I'll do my best to show you how this works here. When I am pointing the camera at something, it's hard to see whether I'm focused. But I press this button and then it zooms in, and then I can achieve focus. And I even have focus peaking turned on, so I can see that I have achieved autofocus on what I am focusing on. Like that, and then I could press the shutter button down just a little bit and focus magnifier is turned off, and now I know that I have achieved focus. So having a dedicated button for that is, in my opinion, absolutely fantastic. I usually on other cameras would map that to something like the trash can button, something that I can get access to, because focus magnifier is life-saving in pretty much all scenarios, especially when you're shooting with manual focus lenses. We have a function button that takes us to a bunch of function presets that is basically a quick access menu, and this is customizable as well. So I can go through and look at any of these and decide, well, I want to change my frame rate. That's really nice to be able to get to that easily. Or if I'm in S&Q mode, I can go into S&Q mode and change the frame rate. I could change my picture profile. So some of these are features that I get into quite often as I'm out in the field shooting and need to make changes on the fly. It's very nice to have these in a quick access menu like this function menu. And if you find that some of these aren't useful, you can swap them out for other menu options as well, which is great. Then we get down here to our dial, and our dial, just like on other Sony cameras, the A7 line of cameras has different features whether you press up, down, left, or right, but these are set up differently. So we have our zebras, and I could turn zebras on and off. We have our shutter, which of course is not controllable just because of the type of lens that I have on and the settings that I am connected to. So that doesn't do anything for this particular configuration. And then I can turn peaking on and off. And so those are great to be able to enable and disable those right from the back of the camera. Those typically would be settings that you would find on a cinema camera that you would not, they'd be toggles. You would not have to go into the menu to enable or disable those. And so having those options here is great. We then have our playback button, which is fairly straightforward, just playback of your footage that you have saved to your internal card. And then we've got the trash can button. So very simple button layout, but it has the buttons that we need for most video shooting. Of course, a camera like this doesn't have internal ND filters or typical iris control and stuff like that. So some buttons that you would see on something like an FX6 are not going to exist. So a camera like this is a great option for video shooters that video is your primary. We're going to go into the menu options here. The menu options are very much similar to an A7S III or even the new A7 IV. So if we go into the menu, I'm just going to go back to our top menu here. which is our My Menu settings. We can find favorites from within the menu and actually create our own quick access menu. So there's an option. I don't really use it because I'll customize this function button with the menu options that I need, but you can create your own quick access menu. Going into the first shooting option, we've got image quality, that we could change our file format, our movie settings, which is your frame rate, and then also your record setting for the quality of the recording that you're capturing. You can always use the menu button to go back, and if you need help, you can hit the trash can button. So I'll go back. You have our S and Q. We can record proxies internally if I wanted to do that on one of the SD cards. And then we also have lens compensation here. We move down, we've got format. I highly recommend formatting your cards within the camera, not on your computer. So when you put new cards into your camera, or you put the cards back after copying everything off into your computer, you then go in and format these right from within the camera. Then we'll move over to our shooting modes. Our shooting modes is something that you might need to change here. So for example, with exposure mode, I can choose between manual, shutter, aperture priority, or program auto, which I shoot in manual exposure. I can then go down into exposure control type, which the PASM mode is what was making it not possible for me to use this shutter button. And so the setup, the way that I have my camera configured, needs to be changed in order for me to use that. So if I use flexible exposure mode, you can see here that most of these other buttons are going to take a different function. And so it's telling me what these are going to do. I can toggle these, long press these buttons to go between auto and manual modes. And so now if I go back out into the camera and go down to shutter, I'm essentially telling the camera to change the shutter speed accordingly. And so it kind of goes into an automatic mode. And so as I pressed and held down on that, you can see the A next to it. And if I press and hold down on this button, it then switches back to manual. And I can also do that for these buttons up here. I can press and hold on ISO, and it's going to go into auto. If I press and hold, it goes back into manual, and same for these other options. However, iris is not going to do anything because I have a manual lens. If I had a lens that had auto support, like the 50 millimeter prime that I've got here, this would change it between manual controls or automatic aperture control or iris control, as more commonly referred to on a camera like this. So I don't use that option. I stay in the PASM mode because I am in M mode, manual mode, all the time. We'll move down to our audio recording settings where we can enable or disable audio recording. We can change our audio recording levels, but notice it's grayed out. That's because we have the handle attached and we're handling that on the handle, as opposed to the 1/8 inch audio jack that's on the side of the camera. If we did have something plugged into that, which means having to turn the handle off. So if I turn the handle off, then notice that this feature comes alive because now the handle is no longer communicating to the camera, and I can control my audio levels from the 1/8 inch jack on the side of the camera. So I'll go ahead and re-enable that so I don't forget later. And notice the shoe audio set here. I could change the audio quality level. I just have it set to 16-bit 2-channel because that's great. If I was going to use more audio inputs and I was going to utilize 2 channels of XLR, maybe even an 1/8 inch audio, I would want to go up into 4-channel and have 4 channels of audio to work with, which is going to add 4 channels of audio to my file. And when I open that file up in a video editor, I'll have 4 channels of audio there, which is better, but in most cases, I'm only shooting 1 to 2 channels worth of audio. And then audio display level, of course, I want that turned on so that I can see it on the back of the camera. Image stabilization, this section is something that I'm going to have to pay attention to when I am shooting with different lenses. So being that I put this 45mm lens on here and it does not communicate with the camera because it's a fully manual lens, I need to go down through this and set the focal length compensation so that the camera knows how to utilize the in-body stabilization with the lens that I have attached. And so as I am using manual lenses, I need to come in and make changes. If I'm I'm using an automatic lens that is a Sony lens that communicates with the camera, I'm not going to have to manually set that. It'll be automatically set for me. Now we also have the zoom here with the zoom. I talked about utilizing this little lever on the front of the camera here by the shutter to zoom in and out. For the zoom range, we would want to go and choose clear image zoom, and then I can adjust the zoom speeds based on the different ways that I'm using to zoom, whether it's using the rocker up here on the front or even using a remote. And so now as I go back into the camera view, and I have this set, I can zoom in. Notice how I'm zooming in. And this is a prime lens. This is a 45mm prime lens, and you can see my total mess. I can zoom in 1.5 times, and this is an absolute boss of a feature on this camera, and a lot of the Sony cameras having clear image zoom. Clear image zoom is almost indecipherable, the difference if I'm zoomed in at 1.5x versus the, not being zoomed in at all. It's a fantastic feature having that on the camera. And so I definitely have that enabled pretty much all the time because it's a useful feature for me. So we'll go down to the exposure color section where I can come in and just kind of change some of these. These settings I mostly set by default, metering, all of that stuff. White balance, I definitely go in and set my custom white balance. Setting a custom white balance is pretty important, and there's a button to easily access it here on top of the camera. You want your white balance to be consistent. My white balance is set here because sometimes the white balance will shift and change, especially if you have light spilling in from something like a window. Setting your custom white balance is important, and it's easy to access utilizing that button on the top of the camera. Under color tone, this is where you're going to find the picture profiles. Picture profile 11 is the S Cinetone, and if you're unsure what different picture profiles mean, just hitting the little arrow and going over to the right, you can see the name. So this is S Cinetone. If I go up to PP10, you can see this is HLG2, and I can go up a couple more and over. See, I've got S-Log3, which is picture profile 8. And so it's easy to get access and see the names, even though the quick names like picture profile 11 doesn't necessarily mean much. You can easily see the names and see which picture profile you're shooting with. And I really like the S Cinetone, so most of the time I am using it. Unless I'm working with other cameras than the FX3, then I usually will go into log, which gives me a flatter profile, which is easier to match to different cameras. So let's keep going. Now we're down in the autofocus manual focus menu, which is good for when you're using the autofocus lenses. We've got nothing showing up because I'm with a manual focus lens. I can't change any of these settings unless I attach an appropriate lens. But I can come in here and change my focus modes just like you can on most cameras, like automatic AF, continuous AF, those type of focus modes. And I can also set the transition speed and the subject shift sensitivity, which is a really cool feature for utilizing autofocus and having focus go from one subject to another, like rack focusing, and it just feeling really nice and clean. Under focus area, I would usually have center fix. Unless I am shooting something more, I have more control, I would go to a focus area and tell the camera, just use a little focus point. Don't try and look at the entire scene, everything that the sensor can see, because sometimes the camera, if set to autofocus with the appropriate autofocus lens, will try and pull autofocus on other things that are moving. So I will use a focus area spot and put that spot right on my subject, so that way if they lean back a little bit or move forward, they're staying in focus just as I am. If I move all the way back here, I'm still in focus. If I move all the way up and then even put my hand all the way up like that, it is in focus because I have autofocus and it's just set to a little point. If I have things going on back here and off to the sides, the camera is not even going to pay attention to those because I'm using the focus area spot, and I'm putting that spot right in the area that my subject is going to be in. I can also set the focus area color. I could change some of these other settings, but I don't, because the default settings are generally pretty good. Face eye auto detect, these are going to be specific to using face and eye auto detection, which means choosing the eye that's closest to the camera. You can set that. prioritizing certain faces. These are all customizable. Focus Assistant with the focus magnifier. This is where you would control what this button does, and by default, I am fine with it. You can also go and set the amount of time that the magnification stays before it will go back. Remember earlier I pressed the shutter button a little bit to get it to go back? I can actually set a time limit, and so focus magnifier will stay on for 2 seconds or 5 seconds and then go back to normal. And then what is my magnification? 1x or 4x. 4x sometimes is a bit much unless I'm shooting something that's far away. I leave it set to 1x. And then peaking display, customizing your focus peaking. As I showed you earlier, that red overlay that was showing when I was trying to pull focus on something, focus peaking helps you achieve that. And I like the red because red is easier to see, especially when I'm shooting outdoors. And so I'll have focus peaking set to on, peaking level set to medium, and peaking color set to red. The only time I change it from something other than red is if I have a subject that's wearing red or an environment where there's a lot of red and it makes it hard for me to see the peaking color. In that case, I'll then switch it to white because white is much easier to see up against red. So lots of great autofocus features in this camera. We're going to bypass the playback features because those are pretty self-explanatory, and the network features we're not really going to get into. But the network features is where you would connect your phone to your camera, or even an external device that can connect Wi-Fi to your camera. You can also use your phone to connect via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and it will bring over GPS data that can be written to your photo files. I don't think it will work with your video files, but also with wired LAN being connected over an Ethernet network using the appropriate adapter. There's lots of great features in there for you to dig through if you're interested. In here in the setup menu, we've got our area, date and time. Always set your date and time on your camera so that your files have the correct date and time. It's such a pain for sorting files later when they're not set correctly. We can also set and reset our settings, or even save settings. I can take all the settings that I have on this camera and save them to a file on my SD card, take the SD card, put it in another FX3, and apply those settings using the load settings option so that I have the same settings on both cameras. That's a fantastic feature. Under the Operation Customize, this is where I can come in and customize all of the different buttons on my camera. So notice that the control wheel is not set to do anything. If I wanted to set the control wheel to something like adjusting my ISO, I could come in here and set that so that when I rotate the control ring, it would set my ISO or change my ISO values. And I could do that for both photo and video. I do have that set up for video. And then there are the function menu that we looked at earlier. By pressing this FN button, I can come in and customize the settings that show up in that menu there. And then we also have the record with shutter option. So if you want to start recording by hitting the shutter button on the camera, you can set that. I have it disabled because I often use it to get out of focus magnifier mode and I don't want to accidentally hit record. I like using the big red record button on top of the camera, so I don't bother with that setting, but you can enable it if you want, especially if you're doing a lot of zoom. You might want to have the record button here just because it's easier. Your finger is already there. So it might be nice to have that enabled if you are using a zoom lens or a power zoom type of lens. So dial customize, this is also just to customize the dial on the back. Touch operation helps us set up how sensitive and how the back of the touchscreen works. Our monitor, brightness, display quality, stuff like that. Display options, very basic stuff here. Power settings. Now here's one that you might need to set, which is the auto power off high temperature. I have found that this camera will get a little warm if you're recording for longer periods of time, and so I set it to high so that the camera is allowed to get a little bit warmer before having any issues. I have utilized this feature on every Sony camera that I've had since they've made it an option, and I've never had a camera get so hot that anything bad happens. It's simply just an option that I think we all need to enable so that we get a little bit more of longevity out of our camera's record times, because these cameras do get a little bit warm, especially if you're filming outside in hotter temperatures. We have our sound options that allows me to turn off audio signals so that my camera doesn't beep and ding when I do things like hit the record button. We've got external output for output to HDMI, and so you can set those settings here. but most monitors are going to auto detect, and so I don't really customize anything here. My Atomos recorders auto detect, so I just leave this set to default, and I just make sure that HDMI info display is turned off, so that way the things that I see, the settings that I see on the back of the display, do not go out over HDMI into my Atomos. I want a clean recording of the video file going out without the settings, and so I make sure that that is turned off. We also have a setup option button here that allows us to do things like set up our record tallies if we don't want those on or off, our fan control, infrared remote control, stuff like that. Great features, and I'm not going to go through them because most of them I'm not using hardly at all, and they're just there in case you need them. So the FX3, a fantastic camera. I hope that this video helped you better understand some of those settings. There's a lot there. This camera does a lot for it being such a small package, and it can be a little daunting going into those menus and understanding what all the different buttons do. I highly recommend that you learn to shoot in manual mode, especially if you have a camera like this. Shooting in any of those automatic modes is going to take control away from you, creative control that you're going to use for shallower depth of field, creating emotion with your shots, and making sure that your shutter speed is set correctly. So I highly recommend that you learn to shoot in manual mode. I have a photography-based manual mode course called Ditch Auto that is available. I've got it linked down below, and I'm working on a video course as well on shooting in manual mode for video shooters like us who have these FX3s and other cameras that shoot video. So that's going to do it for this video that you're watching. Give it a thumbs up if you found it useful, and subscribe to the channel here on Gear and Light so that you can be notified when I put out new videos. But that's going to do it for today. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.